Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a nice 8-game Major League Baseball slate. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? It helps the channel a lot. Really do appreciate it. With that said, this is a pretty interesting slate. Again, it's 8 games. This slate does feature a game in Cincinnati, so to keep that in mind here. Though it doesn't have the highest total like games there typically do. We do have some interesting pitching today, but it's kind of a rough slate for pitching. I mean, it's not a terrible slate, but it's not a great slate either, because we have a few pitchers that look really good, but we don't have a lot. With that said, let's go ahead and get into it here. So, from a pitching perspective, we have three pitchers that have top tier stuff today. First being Sonny Gray for St. Louis against Pittsburgh. He's been pretty good this season. He's got a decent K rate. He doesn't have the best on the slate, but he's second, or tied for second with a bunch of guys. Um, I don't really think there's going to be a ton of strikeouts on the slate, but he's definitely one of the guys that has some upside, though he's also the most expensive pitcher on the slate, which gives him a little bit of risk, especially considering he doesn't have the highest of ceilings. But he has a pretty good matchup here, and I think he's a viable option as a core play or a GPP play, but he's not a must core play by any stretch. Lodolo for Cincinnati has a interestingly tough matchup as he does have the best K rate on the slate. The only catch here is he's got a tough matchup against Cleveland, who really doesn't strike out that much. So that is a concern here, but he is in play on this one, though he is just a GPP play for me at this point. The K rate, Ks are very important for fantasy, but he hasn't been as good as he started at least the year. So he has some upside, but he's definitely a little bit risky. And this game being in Cincinnati is definitely not in his favor. I should also note he's done okay in Cincinnati, but 16.9 fantasy points per game in 5 games at home. That's a little bit tougher than the 24 fantasy points a games he's getting on the road. So he's a good pitcher, but he's definitely got a riskier situation today. Bryce Miller is also a guy I like today against the White Sox. Now, he's purely here because he's facing the White Sox, and they are pretty abysmal. Um, so he probably won't give up any earned runs. If he does, it might be one, home run or something to one of the few guys that can actually hit for the White Sox. But he definitely carries some upside and some low floor here. So he is a GPP slash core play. He's not a must play, but he's definitely somebody that's in consideration, especially at this price point at $9,000. We do have 3 extreme GPP plays. That's Walker Buehler, Christopher Sanchez, and Braxton Garrett. The top two here, Bueller and Sanchez, are pretty much the same price range. They are interesting because they get a decent enough strikeouts, but they're definitely a little bit risky today because they have tough matchups against good teams. The other, Braxton Garrett, he's in a high risk, high reward situation against the Mets. He's had some decent games, but he's also had a bunch of bad games, and so he's definitely kind of a super risky play. But he's not cheap enough to be a Hail Mary play. We do have one of those. That's David Peterson for the Mets. He hasn't really done uh, good or bad at this point. He's given up a couple of earned runs in his first 2 starts. He doesn't have a super high K rate, but it actually looks pretty good here against Miami, simply because they're a team that strikeouts a lot more than either the Dodgers or the Washington Nationals. So I think he has some potential to get a win here and has some potential to get a decent fantasy point output. He doesn't need a 25 fantasy point game here at $6,300, but he can help you be more expensive in your bats. Looking at our bats today. So uh, for catchers, David Fry is the clear-cut top option for Cleveland against Cincinnati. Now, obviously, Lodolo is a pretty good pitcher, so it's not a must play, but he's definitely interesting today as a good option. Salvador Perez has some really good metrics for the slate. He's also got good home run potential, and so he's definitely somebody I'm going to consider on this one. And then Logan O'Hoppe is a good value option for the Angels. He's got a favorable matchup here. He's hit the ball well, and he has nice upside. Cal Raleigh for Seattle also in play. Seattle is a team that is going to be somewhat popular today, and Raleigh will be a guy, especially the way he's hitting last few games, that will be an interesting play on the slate. Looking at first base, we actually have quite a few guys at first base, but that's really because it's top heavy today. We have Otani. Uh, yeah, Wu got. Sorry, I see the comment. Wu, yeah, he didn't end up pitching. You got to check that stuff before lock. But that was on. I did post it in Discord, so make sure to check that out. Looking at first base again, Otani, Bryce Harper, and Freddie Freeman all look really decent today. But a guy I really like today is Paul Goldschmidt here for St. Louis. He is very close to being a core play. He's been inconsistent this season, but he's been hitting the ball better last few games, with the exception of yesterday at least. And he's going to have nice metrics for this particular game, so he's definitely one of my favorite plays at this position simply because of his price. But you could also, there's a lot of guys at this position, which is why I kept him from being a core play today. Christian Walker, Vinny Pasquantino, Pete Alonso, Bobby Dahlbeck, and Tyler Locklear all have top tier opportunities today. Dahlbeck and Locklear are both kind of Hail Mary plays because they are cheap options, but they definitely look really solid on the slate. And so I think that there's a lot of good options there, and you can go cheap or go expensive, depending on how you do your pitching today. As far as your comment, FanDuel to DraftKings, I play more DraftKings, but I mean, FanDuel has different ups and downs. FanDuel is a little bit different the way they do pricing, so it really just, you can play, but I used to play both a lot, but I really don't play FanDuel that much anymore. I used to do videos of both DraftKings and FanDuel, but it's just a lot of work to do it for both because there's differences in how you're doing things. Looking at second base today, uh, Andre Jimenez, let's see, first Cleveland is the top overall play here. He's got good metrics here. He has not really had a bunch of great games lately, but he has some upside as he's hitting the ball decently well. Ketel Marte is also in play today for Arizona. I think Arizona's going to be popular stack, and he's been absolutely phenomenal the last few games. His price is still pretty solid, so I think he's in a good place. He was also very close to being a core play for me as well. Gleyber Torres is a cheaper option for the Yankees. Now, the Kansas City Royals are going to be doing a bullpen game, so it looks like there's going to be several different pitchers he goes up against. But he's been hitting the ball recently, and that's definitely helps him be in play today. And then Jonathan India is kind of a cheap option that you could kind of be sneaky with that has some upside on the slate. Ryan Bliss and Jamie Westbrook are both kind of Hail Mary plays that you can mix in here. Bliss has really good metrics today, as does Jamie Westbrook. So, uh, very interesting options. Looking at third base, we are pretty deep at third today. Uh, Third base is a interesting one because really the expensive options are not that don't look very good today. So we definitely just have a lot of kind of value options. So LeMahieu for the Yankees is one of my favorite plays at this position, even though he hadn't done a whole lot this season. Now he's good in stacks because he'll get at least a few points from a couple hits, probably, and so he looks solid from that perspective. But he's a little bit pricey. I'd still like him to be under $3,000 like he was earlier. But Dahlbeck at third base is one of my favorite plays as well. He has only played a handful of games this season, and he doesn't start most games. But if he does draw the start, he'll be in play because of his price point and the metrics today are really good in a favorable matchup. Then we're going to look at Jake Berger. Now he's a good one-off for Miami. Uh, it, uh, Peterson is a kind of a Hail Mary play for pitching, so I think Berger has some nice potential today for home run metrics. Rafael Devers and Ringifo are both in play today. The only catch with both of these guys is that they don't have the best metrics on the slate. They're kind of high risk, high reward today, especially at the price points. I think this is kind of a position you can kind of punt and go with one of the cheap options. Now, Eugenio Suarez for Arizona is also in play. Again, another guy that hasn't hit the ball particularly well this season, but he's been better recently. And then Locklear, who I already mentioned, can also play at this position for Seattle. So lots of different ways you can kind of do this position, but it's definitely a position I'm paying down on to help pay up at other places. Looking at shortstop, another position that's extremely expensive at the top heavy with Witt, Betts, and Ella De La Cruz all having top tier metrics today. They're definitely worth a look. Volpe for the Yankees, he doesn't tend to be a guy that I like a lot, but he does draw good metrics today, especially at this bullpen game, so he's definitely interesting. But I really do like Lindor today for the Mets. He's been pretty up and down this season, but he's got good metrics. He's kind of a boomer bust play, but he's a little bit pricey for a boomer bust play, but he's really interesting on this one. There's just not much value on this one. O'Neill Cruz is probably the cheapest option that I like, but he has a lot of risk, and he is kind of a boomer bust play as well. So A very rough position. I'm going to try to pay up at shortstop when I can, but it's going to be hard to do because of the prices today. Looking at outfielders, I'm going to switch over to my thing here. 1 second. Okay, so there we go. So for the outfielders, I'm gonna start doing the outfield a little bit differently because I think it's hard to really get good info on these outfielders at times. So looking at the outfielders though, this over 6,000 price options, Otani, Juan Soto, and Judge. All three of these guys have absolutely phenomenal metrics today, as they do most days. For the 5K guys, O'Neill for Boston, Schwarber for Philly, and David Fry for Cleveland. All very good plays. Now Fry can play catcher, but he also gets to play in the outfield, so you can go cheap at catcher if you want. But I think all three of these guys have a lot of potential for home runs today. When we get to the 4K guys, this is where it really gets interesting. Corbin Carroll, he's a guy I really like today. He's priced really fair today, and he's got absolutely fantastic metrics for this game. He is a core play, and I like him a lot. Jock Peterson, Starling Marte, Taylor Ward, and Jake Fraley, all very good options as well, though. And they're priced really nice, and so you can mix and match these five to fit your outfield pretty good today. Looking at the sub 4,000 plays, we have Mickey Maniac, David Dahl, Rob Refsnyder, Tyler Freeman, and Jake McCarthy. These guys are all kind of GPP, Hail Mary type plays. They do have some potential, but they definitely carry some risk today. And then for the sub 3,000 options at this position, Herta Boys for Cincinnati and Canzone for Seattle. Both these guys actually look good today. And so they are a way to get cheap and help you pay up at other positions. Obviously, you can put them both in with Corbin Carroll and just have really solid outfields. So obviously, I don't expect Hertabees and Canzone to score as many fantasy points as I have some of the guys in the 4K range, but they can get enough that you can handle that and then pay up at shortstop or other positions. Looking at our overall sub 3,000 plays, we have quite a few guys today that are under 3,000 that have a lot of upside on the slate. Herta Boys for Cincinnati, Mickey Maniac for the Angels, Dahlbeck for Boston, Carlson for St. Louis, Tim Anderson for Miami. He's always a Hail Mary option. I mean, all these are kind of Hail Mary guys. David Dahl for Philly, Tyler Locklear for Seattle, Jamie Westbrook for Boston, Ryan Bliss, and Dominic Canzone for Seattle as well. Let's look at our stacks here. So our stacks are very interesting today. For Arizona, we have a pretty popular stack here, though there's a lot of guys on this lineup that look really solid. Marte, Walker, Peterson, McCarthy, and then Corbin Carroll. But you could also mix in Perdomo or Gurriel in this one, so it's just a very deep stack and has a lot of potential. For Kansas City, Witt Jr., Pasquantino, Perez, and then either Velasquez or Melendez and Garcia. You can mix those last three in any directions you want, but I think it's a pretty solid stack on this one. For the Dodgers, Otani, Betts, Freeman, Toscar, and Smith, or Pages. It's going to be hard to roster this one. It's so freaking expensive, but it is in play on the slate because they could hit some home runs. For Seattle, Bliss, Canzone, Locklear, Rojas, and then either Raleigh or Rodriguez. This is a really cheap stack, and it definitely gives you a lot of room to be expensive everywhere else. For the Yankees, Soto, Judge, Stanton, LeMahieu, and Volpe. I don't typically like Volpe that much, and I usually like the catcher for the Yankees, but they don't look good today, so I think Volpe looks pretty solid, and he's definitely in play. The next few stacks are kind of the contrarian options, and these are the stacks that you could definitely win if these teams do well. For St. Louis, Gorman, Herrera, Donovan, Goldie, and Burleson, this stack is actually really looking good. It's cheap, and it's going to be effective, I think. For Philly, Harper, Bohm, Sosa, Dahl, and then Stott or Schwerber. Pretty expensive stack, but they definitely have some guys, and Dahl's a very sneaky option in there. For the Angels, Ward, Hope, Pilar, Calhoun, and then either Stefanik, Rengifo, or Nito. The last three there are kind of rough, so a four-player stack is okay here, but I do like Ward, Hope, and Pilar a lot. For Boston, Devers, O'Neill, Refsnyder, Duran, Ron, Westbrook, all these guys have a lot of potential, but it's definitely a high risk, high reward slate there. For Cincinnati, De La Cruz, Stevenson, India, Steer, Fraley, Friedel, or Herta Boys. Really just depends here how you want to, if you want to be expensive or cheap, and how you build the Cincinnati stack today. For the Mets, Lindor, Nemo, Mintos, and then Alonso Martinez, Marte, and Iglesias all have some upside as well. These bottom stacks, really kind of high risk, high reward options with Cleveland, Texas, and Pittsburgh, but they are in play. But you could go with shorter stacks here and use them as kind of one-off stacks there. For Miami and Chicago White Sox, pretty avoidable. They have a couple guys that look okay, but pretty avoidable stacks overall. Looking at our top metrics here, Judge, Soto, Otani, and Witt Jr. have the top overall plays. However, they're super expensive, so it's going to be hard. Brandon Nemo pops up as a decent option here as a nicely priced play. Obviously, David Fry, Perez, Mookie Betts, Freeman, Marte, and Harper all in play. And then David Dahl, JD Martinez, Tyler Locklear, and Dane Myers all do have decent metrics today. For home run potential, Aaron Judge, Soto, Luis Robert, Bobby Witt, Otani, Tyler O'Neill, Perez, Stanton, Gorman, Devers, Toscar, and then Taylor Ward, Bryce Harper, and Ryan Bliss have a little bit of upside as well there. Very interesting slate from that perspective. As for you just asked in the thing, any position today you're looking to spend down to get better value elsewhere? Third base, that's definitely one. Outfield can be two. Really, first and third base have that potential, but third base is really solid for value because there's a lot of good value options. I mean, they're not great, but they're, there's no top tier option looks really great either. So you can pay down at third and maybe in the outfield a little bit and then get some expensive guys and like shortstop it and maybe even second base or first. But you can kind of mix and match there. Um, Overall, I do think the slate's going to be strange because it's kind of odd in the pricing, and there's not, pitching is kind of rough. I do think that it's not going to be the most offensive heavy game slate either. Even the Cincinnati game doesn't look all that fantastic from a metrics, from a hitting perspective. So, which is crazy since it's in Cincinnati. But anyway, this slate is going to be pretty interesting. I think it will be a pretty good one though. It's not super normal for 8 game slate to look like this one does, but it's still a decent slate. I think it'll be okay. And I think we can all make some good lineups here. Definitely suggest GPPs today, but and make sure to check injury report right before the lock because you don't want to see if a pitcher gets kicked out uh, because that sometimes happens. It's pretty rare, but it does happen. At any rate, thank you guys for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments